I recently watched an interview, a very, very fascinating interview with Jason Giorgiani, um, whom I'd seen a little bit of before, and I was aware of, and I had thought, was of some interest. Somebody who had maybe some substantial things to say about certain things, but the video that I saw yesterday that I'm going to link to below was just like it's one of those mind blown kind of moments, and I'm not going to go into great detail about what he says in the video because it's not like he has a patent on this kind of notion, these kinds of observations. I've heard them made before. And like I said, I'm not going to go into detail about those particular things. But if you're interested, please do watch the video and see for yourself and see what you think. But for me, I'm just going to talk about how if what Giorgiani says is true in his video, and it has a lot of historical corroboration. There are a lot of things that he says that are absolutely historically accurate. Involving, I'll just drop a few names like Werner von Braun, Operation Paperclip. That's not a name. Well, it's a name, but it's not the name of a person. How the CIA was originally formed. Just a lot of things. Like I said, I don't want to say too much about it because I don't want to get mired in the. I know that there are those who would take issue with it or who would debate it or argue with it, and I don't really want to get mired in the debate itself or that whole question. I'm just going to say that a lot of what he says has definite historical corroboration, and we see these alliances at work that aren't talked about, aren't exposed all that often, but there is a clear line, something that connects them all, and that is I would call it a strong belief in eugenics to the point of being perhaps homicidal. A homicidal eugenicism is what links these various powerful entities together ideologically. But I'm just going to add my own 2 cents here, or my own observation, piggybacking on Giorgiani's what he says in this video, and that is to say, Giorgiani points out how he says that the paradigm that eventually took shape during the Cold War was that you had these two superpowers duking it out for domination of the world, and then you had this other entity, this stateless entity, but very powerful entity, which had formed in many ways a tactical alliance with the West. They'd formed an alliance with the West and particularly with the United States as the leader of the West, the military leader of the West, because there was a shared anti-communism. So there was a tactical alliance between the United States and these homicidal eugenicists who basically moved in and took control of a lot of institutions. And so you had people who were just pro-United States, pro-West, anti-communist, pro-freedom, and then you had fighting on their side, but only tactically, only as a tactical alliance, not an ideological alliance, because they did not share their belief in freedom or liberty or any of the accompanying beliefs that animate the Americanist. Let us just say but they both hated communism. They both were against communism. All right, and as long as the Cold War persisted. Now, I know I'm dating myself here because the Cold War is now ancient history, isn't it? Officially ended in 89 for all intents and purposes, but it really came to an end in 1991. That was when the Soviet Union officially was dissolved. In 89 was when the Berlin Wall came down, and when that was when the Soviets pretty much lost their power. The power that they had held before, it was clear it was going away. It was not coming back. Okay, so here's my thing. During the 70s and the 80s, time when I was alive, there was, if you can, I ask you, viewer, to think of a time in which you could watch television, and every commercial would feature a family that was of the same race, mostly white families. If you can believe that, there would be a commercial for butter, or there'd be a commercial for Honda, or there would be a commercial for McDonald's, or whatever else, whatever product was being sold, and it was very family centric, and the families were almost all white. If they weren't white, then they were not mixed. Okay, sometimes you would have a non-white family, but in that case, they would not be a mixed race family. You did not see that at all. Sitcoms, you saw just white families. Okay, movies, just, like there would be movies which would only feature white people, and that's it. And there wouldn't be any token minorities. It would just be white people. Okay. This was the standard. And as far as, featuring alternative lifestyles, you just wouldn't see it. You wouldn't see it at all. There would be no gay couples. There'd be no lesbian couples that would be displayed in during prime time, like you see commonly today. It just wouldn't happen. Moreover, there was, during the 70s and 80s, there was not you barely heard a peep of what later became the mantra of Middle America being bad, of Middle America. The real enemies of America are Middle America, are the people, the so-called patriots out there. They're the real enemies. The kind of thing that's standard today. The domestic terrorists. Everyone who's white who doesn't favor the Biden administration is a domestic terrorist and needs to be on a list or something like that. Which is again standard today, but it's been standard it's been standard for a while. I mean, that whole idea, the whole ideology that animates that whole idea, what do you call it, whatever you want, critical race theory or culture of critique or whatever. That was not anywhere to be found in the 70s and 80s. Now, I mean, there were radicals, there were people who felt that way. I'm not saying there weren't anti-white individuals or institutions or people, who said anti-white things, but you never saw that. You never saw that those kinds of ideas given any kind of oxygen. There was respect for, I don't know, it doesn't. It's not necessarily clear that it was, whether it was sincere respect or tactical respect, but there was respect for the fact that white heterosexual families were the norm, and you had, like I said, sitcoms or TV shows, or movies, just various things in media, commercials. That was the norm, and nobody said boo about it. Nobody complained about it. I mean, it was just accepted, and you just have to take my word for it. If you weren't there, I know it's hard to imagine, but that was the way things were, and even people on the left didn't bitch about it. Among liberal Democrats, there was this effort to court, white voters, the white working class. There wasn't just this whole, we're not really any, we don't really represent America until we stop seeing so many white faces out there. That just wasn't around. Those ideas just were not around. Okay. Or they weren't given any kind of oxygen anywhere. But I'm telling you, after the end of the Cold War, that all started to go away. Now, it didn't go away immediately. Into the 90s, you still had shows like Friends, which would never be able to be made today, which had an all-white cast. But shows like Friends began to be criticized for having an all-white cast, and you had other people bitching about all this. There needs to be more diversity. There was more of this strategy of racial antagonism, which is what it ultimately boiled down to. This push of this multicultural push for multiculturalism. I didn't hear the term multiculturalism used until maybe 94, 95. Maybe it was used in some places before then, but it didn't really get any oxygen. It didn't really get any wind under its wings until that time. But since that time, it's been steadily progressing, and there's been no turning back. And it's like, it's the strangest thing, because we have the elite of the nation, the elite of the West, or the so-called elite, the ones who have the power in the West, the corporate elite, the political elite, what have you. It's been trendy for a long, long time for them to say white people in the West are the problem. White people in the West need to recognize their privilege, and they need to stand down, and they need to do this, and they need to do that, and they need to just shut up. If they have any gripes or complaints about anything, they need to just shut up and realize their time is up. And you all know what I'm talking about right now. This type of ideology, this type of attitude, it's everywhere now. But it wasn't anywhere until the Cold War ended. So what am I saying here? What I'm saying is, and this is where it fits together with Jason Giorgiani and what he talks about in the video, which I'll link below, and I highly recommend you watching. It's as though once the Cold War ended and the Soviet Union was gone as an enemy, it was as though now this other force, this parasitic entity that had taken over so many institutions in the West and had formed a tactical alliance with the true blue, sincere Americans, American believers in liberty and freedom and all that jazz. It was as though, like, in the early to mid 90s, this decoupling happened, and suddenly the elites were against the heartland. The elites were against Middle America. The elites were anti-white, even though most of them are white or whitish. It became trendy at around that exact time. Why? I would suggest it's because since this elite, this parasitic elite, this homicidally eugenicist elite, which had taken over so many institutions in the West, as Giorgiani documents, it's as though once they saw one of their enemies fall, being the Soviet Union, and so they're not anything to worry about anymore. It made it so that they no longer had to pretend to be friendly with the West and with the predominant ethnic and cultural strains that animate the West. And they could start to be hostile and to start pursuing this strategy of hostility, and fomenting racial hostility, fomenting ethnic hostility within the West as part of a strategy whereby they would ultimately destroy the West and eventually show their true faces. Once they've gotten rid of the Soviet Union and the West as the historical traditional West, then they can come all the way out and show their fangs. I think we're at the point where we might be starting to see their fangs. And it really is a weird thing. It really is an oddity in the West when you think about it. That in the vast majority of the Western world today, not just the United States but all over, where you see the majority, the traditional ethnic majority of the West being monsterized, being pathologized, being scapegoated, being depicted as the true enemy. Where it makes much more sense. Things are, I'm not complimenting China in any way. It's a cruel, awful dictatorship where there's no freedom and a great deal of tyranny. But one thing I would say about the Chinese is the Chinese government favors the Han Chinese. They favor putting the Han Chinese in a predominant position, and their ethnic cleansing, their ethnic hatred is directed towards ethnic minorities like the Uyghurs or the Tibetans. Now, am I saying they should be attacking these ethnic minorities or tyrannizing or genociding these ethnic minorities? No, of course not. I think it's terrible, but it does make more sense for the government, the governmental leaders, for the elites of a country to represent, to chauvinistically represent for the ethnic minority at the expense of the ethnic, to show up for and advocate for and push for the predominance of the ethnic majority, I should say, at the expense of the ethnic minority. In the West, it's the exact opposite. Why is that happening in the West? Well, I'm telling you, it wasn't happening in the West until the end of the Cold War. It was only after the end of the Cold War that we really started to see mass immigration. I know it was taking shape up to that point, before that point, but it was during the 90s into the 2000s that it was sort of like, oh, well, pretty soon the West isn't going to be white anymore, and that's a good thing, And so all of this happened after the fall of the Soviet Union, when this decoupling could happen. So I would just recommend watching Giorgiani's video and seeing if what I have to say here holds water or not. And I'm interested to hear what anyone has to say. Thanks for watching.